A very good afternoon and good evening to everyone. Today's discussion is going to be different. That's something I can promise you at the outset itself. Something where you go back and put on your thinking caps as to what needs to be changed, how we have a different or a new ecosystem in place altogether. Having said that, before we get into actually a discussion, which is the normal themes for most webinars, we decided to do something different today, where I would request the audience to be glued to their screens and watch the video very carefully and decide if they are actually able to solve the riddle themselves. It's an interesting video. A lot of us have already seen the video. I'm not sure how many in the audience had seen the video earlier. I think the interesting point of the video was after the riddle, when people didn't get the answer, we saw a lot of women thinking, why didn't we guess it? We want to be CEOs, we are CEOs, and yet nobody could answer and think that the fact that it was the mother who was the CEO. We all have been guilty of such unconscious biases at some stage in our life. We are aware of these issues, but it's just that we don't want to address the elephant in the room. I think this is in the context of a female CEO. Let's translate it and go back to the legal profession. Do we have even enough women, female or female leaders in that position? Forget CEO. I think there are two divergent thought processes which are there. There's a school of thought which thinks that the minute you are doing a session about women or women in law, you're talking about gender diversity. This is a fundamental issue. What is diversity? And when you compare it to equality. Gender, let's talk about diversity. Is it by itself, by definition, wrong? Is it, who is the diverse community? Is it actually the women or the marginalized section of the society, maybe based on some race, color? That's where the diversity is needed, or it's something else? Women also as a gender get included within that. Now, what are we asking for? Are we asking for a level playing platform for women? But then I remember an interesting conversation I had earlier with Pratibha. She said, no, it's not equality, it's diversity. Because forget an equal playing platform. We first need to get the women on the board itself. That's the first step. And that made me think that today we have the millennial generation, so-called, or the woke generation, who seem to be very aware about their rights, are conscious about what they are doing, they understand diversity, but till today, we are discussing these issues. Today, I'm fortunate, I have a set of panelists with me who are successful, accomplished women. I want to ask each one of you, obviously I'm going to start with my choice, I'm going to start with Sharina, who moved several years back from India to London, started understanding two different jurisdictions. And today she's a partner who's successful at a foreign international law firm. And that too of a dispute practice like dispute resolution, which traditionally has been thought to be a male and pale dominated industry. And there has been a lot of typecasting that we have seen. So Sharina, what in your experience you have gone through that has led you to actually be a champion and at the same time shatter the glass ceiling?
Thanks, Payal. It was interesting because you were talking about conscious and unconscious bias. And so let me start by setting the scene. So a very junior lawyer nervously talking to a new partner who has joined the team to head it up about her future aspirations of climbing the ladder of success in law. And, this is after working 18-hour days and nights every day, every weekend. And the partner turns to the junior lawyer and says, I don't know you, but are you sure you want to continue in the law, and that too in such a contentious field like disputes? It's a hard world out there. You seem too soft-spoken and subservient, given the culture you come from. If you would prefer marketing or HR, let me know and I can make that happen. Well, that junior lawyer was me. So needless to say, it took grit and determination for me to ignore this and many other incidents, to keep my head down, stay focused, work hard, and to see that I actually distinguished myself from my peers, and to finally, I guess, taste success as one of the first female partners in my team in one of the largest global law firms in the world. So was the example that I set, was it a conscious or an unconscious bias? I guess I leave it to you and the audience to determine. But it's an interesting question about conscious and unconscious bias, because before we get into the unconscious bias, I think it's important to actually set the scene with some stark statistics that I was reading done by McKinsey. And they found that law firms were taking steps to increase gender equality by providing senior leadership support to advance attorneys' careers and offering programs that provided flexibility and addressed major work-life balances. But sadly, these efforts were very limited in success, and particularly in the legal field. And the statistics show that only 19% of equity partners today are women. And women are 29% less likely to reach that first level of partnership than men. It also found that law firms face the highest attrition rate amongst women than men at the equity partner level. And the gender gap is much wider in law firms than in other industries. Women of color face an even steeper climb, with their representation dropping significantly at all levels in the pipeline. So I guess the question is why, and how much of this comes down to unconscious or conscious bias. And according to me, I would think that unconscious bias is actually more lethal than conscious bias. So what is unconscious bias? It refers to both positive and negative attitudes or stereotypes that affect our understanding, decisions, actions concerning an individual or group in an unconscious manner. Whilst unintentional, it still has a negative impact on the members of that group, and there are many ways in which these attitudes and stereotypes can manifest themselves and affect each stage of a woman's career. So interestingly, I was reading the Law Society of England survey, which found that, unsurprisingly, the presence of perceived unconscious bias in the legal profession was the most commonly cited reason why so few women reach senior positions in law. And by way of example, some of the key unconscious bias encountered by women in the legal profession was, one, not fitting into the traditional image of a business leader. So there can be very narrow definitions of what's an effective leader, so which often has characteristics that are traditionally male and stereotypical associated as masculine. So for example, being decisive, strong, being assertive. These are masculine traits and often rewarded, while female traits are undervalued. The second is really a limited commitment to an organization, because despite perceived higher expectations, because of their gender and the common presumption that women want children, many women also feel that they were likely to be considered less committed and therefore less valuable, irrespective of their desire to be a mother or not. The other assumptions are that frequently solicitors are presumed to be tea girls or note takers by virtue of being the only woman in the room. So I remember when I was a relatively junior lawyer, I was standing near the tea table at a Law Society of England conference. And I was wearing a black trouser suit with a white shirt, and someone, actually it was a man, came up to me and asked me if I was going to be coming around with biscuits soon. How I laughed. So it's not uncommon for women to have been in the profession for decades and to be mistaken as an assistant when they are accompanied by a male colleague. So what are the potential solutions for this? Well, some of it includes raising awareness, for example, by implementing unconscious bias training or organizing webinars like this one. Support during work, and this could include conducting regular analysis to identify whether specific groups of staff are adversely impacted by work allocation policies or practices, implementing programs such as mentoring, internal and external networking, and inclusive leadership training. and recruitment and selection processes using blind contextual recruitment to fill vacancies. So I sit on our recruitment panel at the firm. And interestingly, about 2 years ago, or maybe 3, we actually moved to a process where all of us on the recruitment panel would receive, the forms of people coming, wanting to join us, but the names would be blanked out. The universities are blanked out, and the grades are blanked out. So what you come into is quite cold, and you're wondering, well, okay, well, because before you'd say, this one's from Oxford, Cambridge, King's, LSE, whatever, and you'd have that kind of preconceived notion in your head when you walked into the room to interview that person. Now I walk in completely cold. I have no idea about the person's background, the name, nothing. So I guess if any of the women are faced with biases in the future, and anyone in the audience, whether it's your career or in your private life, I guess I'd like you to remember that to be somebody, a woman does not have to be more like a man, but actually has to be more like a woman. Thanks, Payal. I hope that answered your question.
Yes, it definitely did. And I think I couldn't have asked for a better closing statement on that question itself, because you need to be proud of and be who you are at the end of the day. And I think another interesting point which you told us about having the blank CV. Interestingly, a few months back, Vyapak and I had actually co-authored an article on gender diversity, which we submitted to Kluwer. And one of the suggestions itself was, let's have blank CV. And the term which we had put in mind is, let's not have the name of the person, the gender of the person, or the race of the person, or any ethnicity put down on the CV. Just decide the person based on their merit. Do not go beyond that. Now, hearing your perspective, actually, I'm going to first go ahead with Karishma now before I go into the other kind of experiences of Preena and Jenny in different jurisdictions. Karishma, also having been a litigator in Bombay, now having moved to London, I think your career graph is slightly different. It's not getting into a law firm or in that kind of a position, but actually joining a chamber, doing practice. Do you think your experiences have been similar, or you feel that there have been some different experiences which have led you to actually or allowed you to shatter the glass ceiling?
The experiences have been slightly different, but the undercurrent is the same. So while in counsel practice, it's much more about how one needs to be married to their profession. And so is a woman going to have time to be married to her profession rather than to her spouse? And that was the question posed to me before I joined the law. And I found that an odd question. I didn't understand it at the time. And I understand it now because I'm at my desk, night and day, and weekends blur into weekdays when one is a counsel. But I think that was also a question, thankfully, I should add, that was not just said to me, but I think to every single person who wanted to be a counsel. And that made a difference. So I agree with Sharina that one needs to be determined and sort of just leave bias aside, whether conscious or unconscious, and carry on. And I think that really is how I approach things. And I have thankfully always had fair-minded and encouraging bosses. And I've therefore never felt any less compared to my male counterparts. Sometimes I have felt that I needed to prove myself more than an average man doing the same job. But even on those occasions, it's been rare that I have been in those positions. So I think when approaching gender inequality, I've always just taken the view in my mind that there is no inequality, and that has assisted me more than anything else. There's perhaps just one, and I really had to put some thought to, a war story that I needed to bring out. And the only one that I can think of is one of my appearances at the Chancery Division in the High Court in London. This was many years ago, maybe about 6 years ago at least. And I was appearing before a master, not a judge. But, that said, it was a hearing. It was a short hearing, perhaps just a 1 hour hearing. I was opposed by a male barrister. And when I was addressing the court, the oddest thing happened, which is that the master was not looking at me, but looking sideways. And through the whole hearing, he was looking at my male counterpart. not looking at me even when I was addressing the court. And I just found that odd. I couldn't make up my mind whether it was gender diversity or gender inequality or ethnic bias or unconscious or conscious, etc. And really, it must have been unconscious because the judgment was in my favor. So, there wasn't, it wasn't something that was done consciously, but just perhaps, there was this thing where he felt that he needed to focus on my male counterpart and just not look at me at all. But he was obviously hearing what I was saying. So that was one of my stories from London. And one of my stories from Mumbai is actually it's a positive story where I was, protected, if I may call it that. So I was really young, perhaps in the first month of my having got the sanad. So that's the license to practice at the Bombay High Court. And the client had a terrible case. He was one of the fallouts from the stock market scams, and approached my partner and said, we don't really have a good case. So I don't think if the senior associate, who was male, will get me a favorable order. So I think Karishma should go because, she's a girl and she's young, and therefore she'll get a favorable order from the judge. Everyone was gobsmacked. And of course, my partner did, what he should have done, and he protected me, and he said, that's the silliest thing I have heard. And, it deserves that also seniority is followed in our profession. And the senior associate led me in the matter. And I think actually that was a good thing that occurred. So those are my stories, Payal.
Thank you so much, Karishma. I think I could relate to the story very clearly. The last part when you said about it should be better if the woman goes in front of the judge. It's not a personal experience, but you end up hearing a lot of courtroom lobby discussions. Oh, this judge is this cranky or this kind, or maybe has an, sort of liking for women or doesn't appreciate men. So you think it's a bad case, the cost is going to be imposed. Please send the girl. Let's not send the guy today. I think these kind of corridor gossips or corridor discussions in courts is very normal and common these days. And on the other point, which is slightly a serious issue, I would say, where you said having to do a little bit more or work a little extra hard to prove yourself. So that's something which I think it's called some kind of a syndrome where even if you are successful, you keep undermining your own self that you're not doing enough, you're not good enough, and you're not being successful. Is it something maybe as women we end up doing that to ourselves, which is I think popularly called the imposter syndrome? Is it something we actually impose it on ourselves, or is it actually the men treating us in a particular way, which conditions our brain to think of us in that particular manner? So I think these are questions which each one of us have our own independent views, and primarily because of our own experiences, we form those views. So I think we've heard a little bit of perspective from India, how it works in UK. I think I'm going to move slightly and come to Krina. You have a European background. Then it's not a traditional where you decided, okay, I'm going to be into counsel practice or I joined a law firm. You're an academician. Is it different when it comes to academicians, or is it something, I think the same is both, whether you see your students respecting a male professor more, or it's the same respect which even a female professor demands, I would ask?
Thank you, Payal, for the question. And I have to clarify my background a little. I started as a practitioner. So I spent the first, let's say, 7 years of my career as a practitioner and very active in arbitration and court litigation. So I experienced the courtroom as well as the arbitral tribunals on the other side as counsel. And somehow in parallel, I decided to approach the academia by pure, let's say, chance. To be pretty honest with you, I did get tremendous support from male colleagues and male mentors, and in general for all the practitioners in the arbitration field. I moved to academia in the past 2007 2008 as a research fellow at Queen Mary University of London. I moved back to practice to lead an arbitration institution in Brazil, and then went back to academia and going back to the practice as arbitrator. Just also by way of background, I'm coming from Romania, which is a small Eastern European country, which endured about 50 years of communism. And I think Sharina mentioned some of the elements which kind of influence where we are as an arbitration community and as legal practitioners. I think very important is to highlight that we are all coming from different backgrounds, different social statuses, different economic backgrounds, different cultural backgrounds. I come from a very small former communist country where everybody was equal and at the same time nobody had opportunities, where the society was a patriarchal society, so women were supposed to stay and raise the children, and only after 1990, with the democracy and a surge of opportunities on the market, we started to see women emerging as entrepreneurs, as CEOs, as very successful lawyers and practitioners in all the fields. My chance was to, as I said, to work hard, to be determined, not to be, as Karishma mentioned, not to have a mindset where you think there is a bias, where perhaps men would be favored. I think that was partly favored by the fact that Romania as a society in its whole was coming out of this dark period of the history, and everybody was having a fresh start. I have to say that in my personal history, the major example that I had was my mother, who managed to be very successfully professionally. She was the first one who to go to university in her family, and to raise a wonderful family and be very successful. At the same time, I'd have to be honest and say that the academia, unlike the practice, just jumping back to your question, probably has less women than one would see in the law firm. I'm in Stockholm. I'm based at Stockholm University. Sweden is a world example for diversity and equality. But I was an academic in Brazil as well as in UK. The number of female professors is indeed slightly, I would say, lower than male, and especially in social sciences. As far as I know, in 2015, when was the last survey of the academic institutions, I think the number was about 20% female professors in social sciences. And I hope you're all sitting comfortably on your chair. What Sharina was mentioning, the numbers with the law firm, 40, 35%, that's a huge gap. On the other hand, obviously, academia is a bit more comfortable environment in terms of working hours, although successful professors, female professors or male professors, they do work long hours as well.
Thank you so much, Preena. Thanks a lot for that insight. I think it's interesting to see how the different backgrounds, different socio-economic, political, cultural differences across different parts of the world plays a huge role on how you perceive the society, how the trends have developed in a particular society, and how generations after each other take on those, I would say, conscious or unconscious biases, and they're carried forward. That brings me to Jenny. Jenny, at the end of the last conversation with Preena, we understand there's a positive outlook as well. Not everything is biased and not everybody is actually facing or having some horror stories. How has your experience been so far? I understand before being in Hong Kong, you have worked in the other parts of the world as well. So has the jurisdiction made a change? The fact that other than commercial litigation, I also know you have done a lot of investigation matters. Investigation is a different skill set altogether. There is I would say famously we have interviews, but interview is something which can take the color of actually interrogating something. Then it can take the criminal light as well. So how do you think it has differed for you when it comes to that?
Thank you, Payal. So I think what I've observed in my career, so I studied law in Hong Kong, although I did have the opportunity to study in Canada when I was a bit younger, is that it was one of the things that really struck me when I moved back to Hong Kong to go to law school is that although my classmates were predominantly women, I would say probably 90% of my classmates were women, the general consensus, and when my classmates heard that I was considering a career in dispute resolution, was, well, that's not the type of career that's suitable for a woman. In fact, even just within my family background, the kind of bias is that as a woman, you're supposed to look after your family. You stay home. You don't want such an aggressive personality. And it was seen that what I was hoping to pursue was quite, to many people, questionable. And I think what kind of has helped me throughout my career, and Payal, you mentioned my work in investigation spaces. So I've been one of those people, I think, that, the determination that I would have if I put my mind to something, I just, go ahead and I try to drown out the other voices and I go about doing things. So I've always kind of followed that mindset. When I first had the opportunity to get into the investigation space, actually, I got the same criticism or same comments, but, this is very dangerous. This is no place for a woman. You shouldn't. And what's very interesting and what really has kind of helped launch my career is, so back in around, I think, 2013, when I first had an opportunity, I was at a different firm at the time, to participate in an investigation in India. What happened to help me is back then, the team was mainly male colleagues, and none of my colleagues wanted to go to India. So I was one, I was like, no problem, I will go do that. And then everybody said, are you sure? You want to go, and this is not. Is it a good idea? But I went ahead and did it, and actually throughout from March 2013 onwards, I ended up actually going back quite regularly, almost on a bi-monthly basis, and more recently, last year working with Payal and Gauri and others at NDA, I had another opportunity to go back, and I think in a way that actually has really, my India experience has really helped build my career and practice. Having that opportunity and actually the support that I would receive also on the ground was really, really helpful. And so for me, it was a matter of almost, even though the question was, this is not a place for you, it was just kind of putting those questions aside and going ahead and pushing forward.
Thanks a lot, Janie. I think the best part in the first half an hour itself of the panel discussion today is having to hear such different views, different experiences, and that too across different jurisdictions. And that itself shows that how it operates very differently. At times you feel, oh, I am in India, this is only happening in India, but that's not the case. It's something which is a phenomena which is happening world over. People are experiencing issues. What is the extent of the bias or not is something which is debatable. I think one underlying theme I heard from everyone today is There's no substitute for your hard work, your determination, or your courage. And that actually sails you through or puts you apart from the rest of your entire lawyers, I would say. But still, at the end of the day, there is some kind of typecasting which happens. As Shirina said, would you consider going into marketing? Let me put it to Mr. Deveya. You have been in the corporate sector more than 25 years. You are a general counsel. You are engaging with a lot of people, not just the legal fraternity. You're engaging with the business people. Why do you think this typecasting still date exists even in the corporate world?
While I am really very, very nervous, I feel like a squirrel among a pounds of cats today, but I'll give it a shot. So I have a completely different take on typecasting. Typecasting has a positive connotation, and it has got a negative connotation, right? Typecasting happens at every level of a profession, right? Positively speaking, typecasting is nothing but an alter ego of professionalism, expertise, right? So that's inevitable for anybody. A tax lawyer can say that I'm typecasted to be a tax lawyer. An actor can say that I'm typecast. Roger Moore and Sean Connery can say you are typecast as Bonds, right? So it's endless. A pope can say that I'm typecast as a pope. So it's endless. So the point is, where do we draw a line to infer that the typecasting is bad? Typecasting becomes suspect when somebody were to say that Jack can do it better than Jill. Now that's the tipping point, right? So long as that kind of a distinction is not there, I think typecasting is favored. Now, why does the typecasting happen? There are a series of reasons, right? It's cultural, it's education, particularly in India, if you see, the consequences and the tremors in rural areas are very different from cities, for example. The moment you called me, to participate in this, panel, immediately after the call, I did some research and I was trying to see what are kids in rural areas, being taught. So I just, pulled out two sheets from the net. So I got a little chart. These kind of charts are used, to kind of, teach young students, class 1, kindergarten. There's a chart called family chart, right? In this family chart, you can see an Indian mother sitting and making dosa, right? So this is the first kind of education which a little kid gets. And then I got another chart, interesting chart. These charts are all found on the walls of little classrooms in India. So it says women at work, right? It's an interesting chart. These are colorful charts. Unfortunately, my color printer is not working, so I took a black and white. And here it's interesting, the women, there are some, 10 to 12 boxes here. One mother is feeding the child. Another, lady is, using a sewing machine and making clothes. There's a nurse, there's a doctor, there's a teacher. So, I don't get to see I don't get to see an astronaut here. I don't get to, to see a judge here. So this is the starting point, right? This is the starting point where, the typecasting happens. So the point is, bias is a cholesterol, right? Bias is a cholesterol. So what is it we need? We need a social fix. The social fix to a cholesterol is you have to do a social angioplasty, but we are doing social physiotherapy. So that's the whole problem with this typecasting, and it continues. We can't find solutions for typecasting in the corridors of high courts and Supreme Courts and House of Lords. We have to go back to the roots. We have to change our policies. The curriculum has to change. The culture has to change. I don't know how a patriarchal society can suddenly become a non-patriarchal society. So the journey has to be, a lot more has to be done to cure all of this. These, veneer of, surface scratching, I think is not going to, do any change. And, we will continue with this, and we will be doing more panels like this, and you will be, asking us questions. We'll all be answering your questions, and we'll happily go home after that.
Thank you so much. I think it's one interesting thought that just came to my mind after listening to your answer, or the pictures that you showed us, that the mother is making the dosa, or so what is relating in your mind, even as a son or a daughter, is my mother is supposed to cook for me, my mother is supposed to take care of me. So that is what mother's duty is. You're not looking at your own mother as a woman who could have her own ambition, own dreams, and her own life. I think it's your entire upbringing, your own mindset that also contributes to this entire typecasting. Interestingly, some of you on the panel might not be knowing, but there's a movie which got released yesterday on Shakuntala Devi, which is about the first women Indian to be a mathematical genius. It's a very interesting story because it shows how even her daughter could not relate to her being a mathematical genius. How is it that my mother is not sitting at home and working for me or taking care of me? It forgets the fact that despite being a daughter, you being a woman, you're not respecting your mother, who is also a woman and can have separate aspirations and look at her differently. That's also a type of typecasting, I would say. I think we are going to definitely run short of time. I am going to move into the next section. Or I think one of the quotes which stuck with me is, women are helping women is a very formidable combination, because they say that when that kicks in, there is no stopping us. But then that also led me to think, is it only a burden on women? Absolutely not. What are the 50% of the population, which is the male community, what are they there for? Are they not going to support us towards it and just keep the entire burden on women? Okay, you all have to support. Maybe there are certain selected women who have reached a certain positions, are successful, so it's their job and their responsibility to empower the rest of the women. So is it that men cannot be an ally to us in this particular exercise? I'm going to start first with Sharina. Sharina, what do you think? How do you actually check those biases, and what has led you, maybe at your level, personally, individually, or as an organization, that can be done to actually empower these women? Because it's important to see what is tangibly being done, because maybe we have webinars, we have enough writing sessions which discuss and talk about these topics. What is actually being done to ensure more and more young women come up, they understand that they have an opportunity and they can actually excel in a particular field?
Thanks, Payal. I think I can divide your question into a number of parts. One is, I guess what I'm personally doing, and tied in with some initiatives that are going on. And also, I think because, we're all in arbitration here, probably what the arbitration institutions are doing. And then I think touching upon a bit of what our firms are doing. So, to empower women, to empower other women. So moving to the first part, really, I thought I'd touch upon the pledge, which I think is a phenomenal, it's a phenomenal initiative. I'm on the steering committee of the Pledge for Equal Representation of Women in Arbitration, which has the objectives of improving the profile and representation of women in arbitration and to appoint women as arbitrators on an equal opportunity basis. The pledge was launched a few years ago, and it was launched by a group of women who thought, well, somehow, and you talked about it, it's pale, stale male. Those are the people that are dominating the arbitration scene, particularly as arbitrators and counsel. So what can we do about it? So the pledge was formed, and today the pledge has about 4,100 signatories from around the world. And it's become a world initiative. It started in London, it's become a world initiative. I launched the pledge in India 2 years ago, and I chair the committee in India. And through that, I've started a number of initiatives for women in arbitration in India. So last year, I traveled to India with the Director General of the LCIA, because I'm on the board of the LCIA, and Bill Rowley QC, who used to be the past president of the LCIA. And we actually held an all-women roundtable dinner for women in Mumbai and a separate dinner in Delhi. And we kept it small. We didn't keep it one of these large events. We kept it small. There were junior women, there were senior women, there were general counsels, there were solicitors, there were barristers. It was a mix. And there were some visiting QCs as well. So it was a mix of about 20, 25 women. And the dinner actually interestingly led to friendships, mentorships, work-related opportunities, and non-work-related opportunities as well. And this led me to actually start a WhatsApp group for women in India in arbitration. And I think the question would almost be incomplete if, as I said, we don't touch upon what the arbitral institutions are doing to empower women. And in this regard, I think you can see positive results, and that's linked again with the pledge. So, for example, the LCIA recently reported into that in 2019, there was an increase from 23% in 2018 to 29% in 2019 in the overall number of female arbitrator appointments in the LCIA. And whilst the number of female candidates selected by the parties and the co-arbitrators has increased, the LCIA remains probably one of the main drivers for gender diversity, with 48% of all arbitrators selected by the LCIA being female. Increased diversity is also demonstrated by a rise in the number of appointments by the LCIA court in non-British arbitrators, which is something that was clearly addressed. And as I'm a member of the board of the LCIA, I'm proud to say that actually the LCIA won a few weeks ago an award for its diversity initiatives at the GAR Awards. It's not just the LCIA. You look at the ICC, and they reported just in July this year in its annual report that it made about 1,400 appointments and confirmations of arbitrators, and that led to 2 new records by the ICC. The first was that about 900 individuals appointed or confirmed actually came from 89 different countries. And that is the highest number of jurisdictions to date, which the ICC suggests is down to active efforts of the ICC court to increase the diversity of its panels. And the second is that the overall number of female arbitrator appointments in the ICC rose to 312 from 273 appointments in 2018. And that represented about, I would say, a 21% of all appointments as compared to 18% in 2018. So also interestingly, the number of women acting as precedent increased to 30% over the last 3 years. So well done to the ICC as well. SIAC as well has appointed female arbitrators in about 36.5% of the cases, and HKIAC about 20% of the cases. So, it's interesting to see what the institutions are doing to empower women. So now that I've touched upon what I've done and the institution's done, I think it would be incomplete not to think about what firms are doing to empower women. And so I take my firm, for example, and it's been running a very successful firm-wide career strategies program called the CSP program for the last 10 years. And it's a global modular development program across our global offices and aimed at creating a more gender-balanced partnership. The CSP was actually the first of its kind in the legal sector when it launched in 2010. And I was actually one of the first batches that went in for the that was chosen to go in for the CSP because I became partner in 2012. And the objective was to increase the number of female partners in Europe, Asia, and Middle East from 16% to 21% over 3 years. And did we achieve the target? Yes, we did. And we achieved this target, and the continued focus on recruitment, promotion, and retention has increased actually the female partner representation across our Asia, Europe, and Middle East offices by 27% as of June 2020. We also have in our office 2 networks. One is the Women in Norton Rose network, which focuses on promoting women to partnership level. And then there's the early Women in Norton Rose network, which focuses on supporting junior members of the firm. So I, as a partner, am asked regularly to nominate women who we think would be ones that we see as stars of the future. And this helps the women actually to build and maintain a network, endorse a culture that provides a forum within which issues are discussed. We bring in powerful clients and women to talk to the junior members, and it ensures that the firm's commitment to gender parity is actually visibly, internally, and externally supported. So it's quite interesting, to see these changes. We've also actually, interestingly, changed the salutation style in all our litigation correspondence, and we no longer say "dear sirs." It's a firm-wide initiative that we actually say "dear," and we actually give the name of the law firm. So I guess in conclusion, there is an obligation on all of us to do what we can to support each other and all women that are entering into the legal profession. And I read a very interesting quote by Serena Williams, which really struck a note with me. And she said, "The success of every woman should be the inspiration to another. We should raise each other up. Make sure you're courageous, make sure you're strong, and make sure you're extremely kind, but above all, humble." I hope that answered your question, Payal.
Yes, it did, Shirina. And I think the point here is it's not one person doing it. It's a movement. It's everybody coming together, and that actually ensures you attain gender parity. And I think it beautifully showed to us that how it's at a firm level, various arbitral institutions, or at your level. I mean, that actually brings me to my next question to Pratibha. Pratibha, the way you have started off your career back in the US, you went to Southeast Asia, then you're back in India. You have worked in law firms, you have worked in corporates, then you're back at a law firm again. Based on your experiences, what do you think has actually ensured that those biases are checked in various organizations, no matter what the mode is or what the form is? And what do you think has actually allowed you to maybe be more supportive and actually ensure you empower more women who work along with you in the profession?
Quite honestly, Payal, there's nothing I can do to check the biases. I think, I think what you've heard from all the women here is you just got to maintain that grit and determination to make it through. I think it gets more challenging when you work across jurisdictions because the culture changes, the biases change, and you don't even realize because you're so in the middle of it. So I think just, going through, if I compare US to Japan to Hong Kong to Mumbai to Delhi, each had its own biases and its own culture in dealing with women. I had a similar experience to, I can't remember who mentioned this, but, my first review, I got to hear, it's a jungle out there and, you think you can manage it. I'm pretty sure they didn't say to, my male associates. To going to Japan, where I was the first woman ever to be in the Japan office. And it was quite an old boys network. When I got there, they were not happy to see me there because, 3 a.m. they'd be like, you can feel the testosterone in the office. And they would have had to change how they deal with each other with a woman around. And by the time I left there, I was, until date, I'm friends with all of them. To coming back to India, where I thought I'm going to really have real issues. And surprisingly, I found that India is one jurisdiction, and maybe because, I came here quite senior, but I felt the least objectification when I came to India. And most of the time, I don't remember that, what my gender is. It's very gender neutral, my practice here, which is very counterintuitive, right? But I mean, to Devaya's point, those the pamphlets he showed is what we grew up with. So we know that gender bias exists. It just might not be there for a certain class and a certain seniority. So I don't want to give some extremely rosy picture of India. While growing up, I did get those. I'll be very honest. I think other than just trying to be a role model right now for my daughter, before that for my cousins, because, in my family, nobody had worked before. None of the women had ever worked before. I was the first one. Other than being a role model, I don't think I have done much for the cause. And I think sometimes you just feel so overwhelmed. All said and done, I'm a mother. I'm practicing full time. The reason why you have old boys network and not have old women network is because women don't get the time to network. And that just becomes that extra plate, extra thing on their plate. So I keep telling myself when my kids are older, maybe I'll go and do that. I'm pretty sure my husband's not saying that. So, fact is, at least till my generation, that difference still remains. I'm hoping, the younger generations are going to be even more open-minded than we are and not have these limitations put upon themselves and are out there networking and creating those networks and pulling others up. Having said that, after this discussion, I think, Gauri, we need to go back with Nishith Desai, get on the drawing board and see what more we should be doing. We have a very good representation in the firm, but I think for the legal profession as a whole, we should be having a discussion on what we ought to be doing.
Thank you, Pratibha. I think we understood a jurisdiction perspective. Now I'm going to take it from a jurisdiction to a slightly different aspect and go to Karishma. Karishma, it's hardcore litigation. It's always said there's a difference when you do litigation in a firm and when you're actually practicing as a counsel. Though I thought the theme of our second question was deciding what are we doing to empower these women. But I think along with that, I would also want you to let me know whether you feel there's a need to empower the women even more, because you have seen instances when you're going to be appointed as counsel, or you're going to be appointed, maybe chosen as one of the names which has been nominated as an arbitrator. You see there are some kind of preferences which are existing, and because of which maybe women are not coming up into the entire forefront. So is that also one of the reasons which could contribute to us taking an even, I would say, a conscious step towards ensuring we empower more women to come up in the area of dispute resolution?
Disputes is, yes, it's certainly a different ball game altogether. It's a smaller sort of circle, as in you're not dealing with the numbers that large law firms are dealing with. I think there is actually a need to empower the next generation, both men and women. And I say that because, moving abroad and being lucky to have this exposure, the international exposure, which means, changing your style of drafting, changing the manner in which you deal with clients or deal with judges and so on. It's just, it's a lucky place to be. And I think we just need to bring that exposure to the younger generation. And that also brings me to the second point, which is, so I have 3 points actually very quickly, and I'll take you through them as far as what we need to do. Upbringing, it's super important. I think one of the reasons that I am the way I am is because my grandmother was extremely intelligent, and when my mother was a doctor, she just assumed that she wouldn't have to work when she couldn't work. But my grandmother encouraged her to work, and that was where all the biases changed in my household. And I think I feel no gender inequality wherever I am because, those biases were changed and my mother was a working woman. So upbringing is really important. And then just other things like a small thing is I don't attend, and I don't allow any of my juniors to attend a panel such as this where there would be all men. There are so many of them, and I just say that's it. You can't attend, and it works. And it has also started to bring in more women as speakers and so on. And the third is an incident when I moved to London, and I was in discussions with a partner of a law firm who was a man or a male, and I referred some work to him and to that law firm, and one just assumes that they will think of you, when there is work which requires your kind of expertise. That never happened. A few years went by. And then later on, when I met another partner of that law firm, and I had a frank conversation, and I was just like, there's something wrong. I can't tell what is wrong. And I was openly told, yes, that team is an all-male team. And every time they instruct counsel, they only ask for men. So I sat down with that law firm and I said, look, things have to change and you need to change policies internally. And so we came up with a strategy that whenever they ring up a set of chambers and say, I need a barrister who is maybe 15 years of call and they need to be available for a hearing in November, the chambers need to be instructed that at least one person on that list of barristers should be a female. And that's worked, and that has increased, gender diversity in both within that law firm as well as, women being instructed when they're at the bar. And I'd also like to give credit where it's due, because when I moved to London, it was tough. It was the peak of the recession at the time, and so on. And this is a little bit of a blend of gender and ethnic points. And I contacted a number of people because I needed to become familiar with how the systems work and what is the difference between a barrister and a solicitor and how it all works in London. No Indian person responded or was willing to talk to me, other than one, and she's on the panel today. And I've got to thank Sharina for it. She is the only one. Can you believe it? And I must have contacted many, like several tens of, let's say about 30 or 40. And Sharina was the only one who actually assisted and helped and spoke to me and made me comfortable with the way, the dispute systems work in London. So she does lead by example. And that's what we need as well, leading by example, which circles back to Pratibha's point.
Thank you, Karishma. I think from the answer, there are two takeaways at two levels. One, you spoke about the fact that what kind of teams are briefing you. If it's all male member teams, they are not actually very comfortable going out and engaging a female counsel. Now, before I actually go to Gauri, and I would want her to answer in her role as to where she is in her position as a partner of a law firm and having a litigation background, until date does litigation, engages counsel, briefs counsel, and I would say goes ahead and nominates names for arbitrators. Just to carry our earlier thought, I would go back to Krina, having known her background of where she had also done litigation. Did you face similar experiences, or is it that you actually felt that the male counterparts were more supportive and actually encouraged you? And it did not feel like there was a need for empowerment per se, because maybe the society or the surrounding background or the circumstances were such that the men were supportive of such action. Women coming up in the profession. To understand from Sharina on her background, I've also litigated, whether it was a different experience back in Europe.
Thank you, Kyle. I'm well. To be honest, I think there was there were several examples coming from the male practitioners, but I never felt there was a conscious discrimination in the courtroom. Again, with law firms, we have to think that in 2000, when the profession took off in Eastern Europe and Central Europe, and major law firms made their way to these regions, everybody was starting from zero. So what they were looking for young, enthusiastic, well-qualified people, and at that point, and this circles back to Sharina with she mentioned the study of the Law Society, and there are several other studies. The European Parliament in 2017 conducted a study on male and female representation in the legal profession. This was 2017, quite recently. And law graduates in the profession are about females that are graduating are about 50%, and you'll be surprised if the number gets very close to 70%. So this is why I like to stress that it's really important to understand that we all come. The arbitration community as a whole is international arbitration community. We're international. And we heard stories of us moving around the globe and not really feeling the pressure of the lack of diversity. But that's because we went a step above our culture and our jurisdictions. But if you go back and go back to where you're coming from, then you have to be mindful to the fact that there are differences, and some political factors, some economical factors, they will have a different influence. And I think what is important, and it was said, is to be an example. But I think the most important thing is to make sure that all of us, we ensure that we give equal access to everybody. And I think for me, it's and just to give you an example, because you're saying coming from Europe, and everybody looks at Europe and even Western Europe as being the leading example. But I don't know how many of you know that the first female judge in Portugal was only appointed in 1974, and the first female in a high court in the Northern Ireland was appointed in 2015. This is 5 years ago. And the first female lecturer, university lecturer in the UK was in Scotland in 1990. So it's your whole universe and reference points, they will just completely disappear. So we have a reference point for international arbitration, and we're so lucky. And Sharina and Janie and everybody here in the panel, we have sufficient experience, and we've witnessed earthquake transformation of the arbitration community in the past, let's say, 10 years. If you look at the arbitration, and I'll take another minute, I know we run out of time, but I really have to say this, and I think it's important that we do lead by example, and I think it's important that we as individuals, as it was said, we open the door to everybody equally have equal opportunities. If you look at the arbitration institutions, when I started in the arbitration back in the day, Stockholm Chamber of Commerce Arbitration Institute was Ulf Franke, the Secretary General. Now is Annette Magnusson. LCIA was, we have Jackie van Hersolte, but before this we had also a male. We had in VIAC, now is Alice Fermat-Wolf. Before we had a male. I'll not name everybody, because obviously what I'm trying to say, HKIC, we have Sarah, we have in Latin America, if you look in Latin America, overwhelming number of arbitration institutions led by women. And I think this is what we have to show. And my position as one teaching the students, and I see students coming and asking, we have an overwhelming number of female students, obviously. But I think what is important is to show that and provide opportunities and give them these examples. And even more important than this, is important to discuss it. We are, if we look at the panel, and we are all parents, and we all face the same problems, but nobody's discussing them. And once you meet, you have the cocktail after the conference, or you have the break in an arbitration, and so on. And you realize, oh, I have to call to see my kid because well, she has a ballet lesson and I can't make it. We all have the same problem. So what I think is more important than this is to be open and discuss it. And it doesn't matter if we're male, female, we all have the same problems. So this is why the panel today, I think, is really important. And another note, ICA Task Force report, and everybody, I'm sure, got the copy. I think it's a very powerful, I answered the questionnaire, so I was involved in a way, I was not in the task force itself, but it's a leading example of how to move things forward. And I think this is very important. I took too much time.
Thank you so much, Veena. I think you highlighted the best point, that all of us in the arbitration community needs to go back and read that report, because it actually deals with some very critical aspects, how we actually address it when it comes to your counsels, arbitrators, what factors are looked into. And the fact that it's several law firms from various jurisdictions coming together and actually analyzing each of these factors to see what contributes towards this and how we can actually improve the situation, it's even more critical for us to take it forward from there. Going back to now Gauri. So Gauri, I think I gave a little bit of a background what I'm going to ask you already about. I still remember my interview when I was being interviewed for NDA, which I will till date never forget. I had two rounds initially with two other law partners, which I felt, okay, I have managed to do well. I am going to get selected in NDA now. The final round was only supposed to be with Mr. Nishith Desai, which also happened. But then I was told, Gauri is there today in the office. She is also going to interview you. The interview went, and oh my God, I think that's the scariest interview I have ever given. And I came back home telling my parents, I am never going to be selected at NDA. The kind of questions she asked me, I could just not answer. I think the reason I gave this background is, and also the fact that everybody in NDA looked up to Gauri as being one of the most thorough professionals whom we have. The interesting thing is, women are known to be very thorough, very diligent, very meticulous at their work. We see 50% of the lawyers coming out from law schools are women. Where do they end up disappearing in this entire process? I mean, Gauri, you at this stage, when you're interviewing a candidate, I know for sure that you might not look what the gender is for sure, knowing you. But what is it that you would advise every young lawyer, or even specifically maybe a girl who is not that confident? As we say that you don't associate a lot of confidence, assertion, aggressiveness with the women community. What would you advise them how to go about their entire career itself?
I think, Payal, unfortunately, when we meet these young lawyers, some journey of their life has already gone by, right? So I think that is something it's very difficult to undo sometimes, right? So I think the first thing as a firm or as individuals, before I have to tell something to the lawyers, is to see, have that empathy to figure out what is the background, right? And as Nishith always says that we have to give opportunity to people coming from, different backgrounds, right? So what is the background that person has come from? It becomes very important to understand. We are all human beings. We are just not machines, delivering, a product, right? So that becomes very, very important, number one. Number two is, I'll just go back and, how I was raised, and maybe that will give you an example, right? When I came into my teens, my father just told me one sentence, that the boys may look at you, never look down. Okay? That gave me so much strength throughout my life that you are not to be looked at as a, and you can look back, right? So I think that one thing that sort of, changed the way I sort of approached my entire life. I did make mistakes, but my father never said that, to protect me. He said, go solve your problem, right? So how a person is raised becomes very important. And as you rightly said, Krina, that when I'm raising my son, one incident I always narrate, we were in Turkey and my son hates people smoking, right? So there was one girl who was smoking on the side. He said, see, that girl is smoking. So I was wondering that, how to answer that. Yes, smoking is wrong. But is his objection that because a girl is smoking? So it was a very difficult conversation. And I had to ask him and prod him, are you objecting because a girl is smoking? Or are you objecting because someone is smoking, right? So, I mean, these small things, as when you raise your kids, it is our responsibility to sort of, do that. Now, coming to your specific point, Payal, on, I know I slightly digress, but I wanted to give that little background. Now, coming from a profession perspective, right? I always feel that, women probably try to sort of, perfection is the point that you made, right? I think I could be wrong, but that could be my perception, that could be my bias. But we expect too much from ourselves, right? I mean, that everything has to be perfect, that at home everything has to be perfect, with your in-laws, everything you have to manage, with your parents you have to manage at office. So first thing is, we are not super women, we are women. Let us, we will, sort of not have everything going right at every point in time. So that is the first thing. Second thing is, take care of your health. That is absolutely important. As a litigator, I don't know, some of you may know, Bombay High Court, it's very difficult to get lifts. and we had to run up and down with heavy bags. And I used to do a lot of IP litigation, so you had bounds of evidence with you and go up and down. I, had a slip disc early, a very early part of my life. So please take care of your health, because if you have to, lambe race ka ghoda, if you want to become a long-term professional, that is absolutely necessary, and women simply don't do that. Okay, I learned in my, when I touched 40, I said, that's it, you have to do that, right? So that is the second thing, because if your body is sharp, your mind will always be sharp. I know, I mean, some of these things are not said often, but that is why I'm saying these things. So that is an absolute must, if you want to become a thorough professional. And the third thing is that, in terms of your family, you somewhere need to have conversations to say that, what is it that you want to do and what support that you need. You have to have open conversations. Touchwood, I had always, supporting bosses, supporting family. I mean, I did my solicitors after my marriage because my husband supported me. He took out my fear of company law and tax matters. So, I was always supported by all the family members. But I know that some of these conversations need to be had, and I had to have those conversations, even though I had the supporting family, that what is important at what point of time in your career. And in fact, I do remember of having these conversations. So it is important that some things maybe you expect too much from yourself, and sometimes you expect too much from your family also, right? So that balance needs to be brought out. And the fourth thing I will want to say is, when you go through a childbirth process, right? I think, you may feel that now I have to, sacrifice or have to lag behind or otherwise. I don't think you need to sort of have that mindset. 1 year here and there really doesn't make a lot of, difference in your long-term career. And you can definitely come back with vigor. You can, sort of accelerate thereafter. So that should not be viewed as a, somewhere you have to compromise, and just be, just focus on the long term, and then you do very well.
Thank you, Gauri. I think we saw the personal angle and the personal side of things also, which need to be balanced while you're doing your profession. And which brings me to my next question to Mrs. Devaya. Moving a little away from the personal side. I mean, we have heard about biases, we have heard about experiences, we have heard about empowering women. What I want to understand from you is, do you think that there is a business case itself for having a gender diversity or equality when it comes to corporate? A lot of places these days we see that you have to have women on the board, or because there wasn't sufficient representation in the past. So, and there have been several reports, like I think we heard about the McKinsey report itself. We have heard several reports giving us statistics. How many women are there in the profession, and at what positions are they there? So do you think there's a need to have a business case being established itself within organizations so that you ensure you have the gender parity?
So, well, let me roll out a little bit of stats for you. Actually, after we spoke last week, I was doing a head count for the gender ratio in my team, at least legal and compliance. I was pleasantly surprised that, look, I have about 60 people spread across Everstone and Everstone buyout companies. Out of 61, 55 male and 45 female lawyers. I think that's an accomplishment by itself, if you ask me. So I've done well on that front. So let me narrate, an incident to you. While about a decade ago, I got a sweet little letter, from a small town, from a law student. And, I get emails, I get all of it. But this letter was very, very special. She was doing her third year law. She was doing a 3 years course, and she was in the third year law. She wrote a very, very, touching letter. So I wrote back to her saying that, come and meet me. So I was kind of thinking that, she wanted a job, and the usual ask, right? So she came with a very, very strange, situation. She was actually not talking for herself. She was actually making a representation. She said, look, in colleges like ours, small town colleges, it is so difficult to even get internships, right? law firms, have their own, selection criteria. And some of the big law firms and take, interns only from, the tier one law colleges. So I really felt, bad, and I thought that was a moment for me, right? Ever since then, while I started an informal, internship academy, and so many girls have done, and they still continue. My doors are open for tier two girls from law colleges to come and do their internship with me. They pour in while we speak. While I speak to you now, I have two girls doing internship online. My office is closed. We mentor them. We teach them soft skills. And I'm so happy that in the last 1 decade, so many of them have already become partners in law firms, right? And I go back to them for advice. That's the beauty. I mean, many times when I go back to these ladies who are now partners, you are my intern, but now look, I am coming to seek advice from you. That's the reality of the situation. And I'm so happy about it. Now, to answer your question, I think, look at these board representation. The board, the listed company board representation requirement is a legal requirement. These are not something which you can achieve by legislation, right? Legislation can achieve only limited purposes, and it kind of become a very technical issue. There has to be a social revolution. I think, these, gender, equality, the right balance, and all of that has to become some kind of a revolution, a social culture to be successful.
Thank you so much, Mr. Devaya.
One more thing I want to tell you. I mean, that is the highlight of my internship. I had a girl who came and did internship in my office who was physically challenged. She could not hear, she could not speak, right? She interned with me, and trust me, the 1 month internship with her was sign language. I am not trained to do any sign language internship, but trust me, Payal, I did it, right? So I feel so happy about it.
Hats off to you for that. We need more such men who will encourage women to come up, I would say. I think we have really run out of time. And before we go to the quiz section, I just have one question, since most of us over here are disputes lawyers. We have lawyers like Pratibha over here who had a different background, did regulatory funds practice, then came back to India and actually ventured into the disputes area as well. So I think just one question to the panelists over here, and if you could just briefly answer in a minute. What is it you are looking for when you are engaging your counsel, you are engaging your arbitrator? Because what is that criteria that's stuck? Because I think there was a study which said boys can network, girls can't network. So boys keep meeting those same boys in parties and they have become friends. You keep recommending their names itself. Women are not networking. They are not out there partying. So is it because of that they are not getting the opportunity? On this question, actually, I'm going to start with Jenny first. Jenny, any experience, any thought which you have seen or idea where you have felt that this is something which is prevalent, or it's a pure merit-based selection?
So I think for me, what I often, I guess when it comes to counsel, particularly in counsel or arbitrators in arbitration, I think one of the potential disadvantages that women have is that we're not maybe historically not always as visible in the panels. We don't, so many times, at least in my part of the world, we might not promote ourselves as actively. And very often that's how, I guess, when we select counsel, you look at the legal directories, you look at who's on the panels, you look at who's publishing. And so that often leads to, I guess, historically, less women being selected. But in terms of what we look for, I mean, it's not whether you're a man or a woman. It's whether, you're meticulous, you have great technical skills, user friendliness. It's skills that are not tied to gender. But then we would look. So it's. I think the issue really relates to, women perhaps not promoting themselves historically or supporting each other as much as one should.
Thank you, Jenny. I think I'll move on to Karishma because she is in a slightly different position where she is going to be appointed. So what Is it different? Is it because you have networked enough or you haven't networked? And has that actually impacted you getting engaged as a counsel?
I think more than anything, it's the trust that the clients have in you and being true to your brief. So always doing whatever is in the best interest of the client. And I think that has ensured me more briefs than anything else. Also, when you're in court and you have done your advocacy, and you may win, you may not win, but so long as you have notified the clients before of the pitfalls in their case, and they're aware of their pitfalls, and they've knowingly gone in, and they have seen that your advocacy has been, the best that they could have got, they're happy with the result, whether or not whether they win or they lose. But that said, there are some stark experiences. For example, I've been in practice 15 years. I have never appeared before an arbitration tribunal that contained even one woman. Never. So, the work that Shrina is doing is great, and we need more of that. And it's going to be some time, because a 15-year career and never having even one arbitrator is quite something. The Bombay High Court also put out its senior counsel list earlier this year. Not one woman, not a single woman on the whole list. I mean, that is really telling. So yes, there is a lot to be done. But in terms of being selected as counsel, I think it would be, your style of advocacy. That's foremost, because that is, what you're selling, and also being true to the client.
I'm going to actually interrupt over here and go to the last section before I get the last thoughts from people, because personally also I've been looking forward to this section right from the time we conceptualize this event itself. So for the audience who's attending us the session today, I'm going to open a poll with there are going to be 3 statements. You have to identify which is the false statement. So I have just opened the first poll over here. So according to, what I'll do is I will try and read out what these statements are. The first statement was, my role at a client sporting event was to serve beer. The second one was, when I was asked to observe in a flight about the service attendant, the way they are serving, because that would give an idea about how one needs to serve. The third statement was, I'm sorry, just give me a second. Yeah, whenever my supervisor would eat chicken wings, they would expect me to take out the skin of the chicken wings, because that supervisor would not prefer to have that. Now, the kind of responses we got over here is, most of them thought that the chicken wings one is the false statement. So Jenny, back to you. You have to tell us which is actually the true or which is the false statement in these 3 scenarios.
Well, the participants are correct. So the C, the one that the chicken wings is a false statement, but actually it's false for me, but true for another female colleague. So all of them are actually true, just not personally true for me.
But you know what, Jenny, actually, when I saw the statements, the first statement itself actually made me raise my eyebrows, which says that at my role at a client sporting event, when you are a lawyer over there, because you are a woman, you are asked to serve beer. I mean, that itself was a shocking statement and made me feel that, oh my God, it can happen in developed jurisdictions where progressive men or women around us can expect their colleagues, women colleagues, to actually serve beer, which itself was quite a shocker for me. And it's surprising to know that it's actually a true statement. What I'm going to do is quickly move to the next one and open the poll. Before I open the poll, I'm going to read it out. I'm moving to Sharina. Which one are the 3, which is the false statement? The first is, I could not eat an apple in the room or print paper as the nose, as the noise.
It is not appearing on the screen. Yeah, now it's come.
It is appearing. I could not eat an apple in the room or print the paper because the noise would irritate my supervisor. I think before I read out the other 2 options also, let the audience actually start I think they have started the poll already. Then I will go through each statement with Sharina. Let them take a guess. I hope my voice does not give away any kind of for them to understand what the answer is actually. So Sharina, I have the statements before me now. I have already read the first one. The second one was, I had to compulsorily read 5 pages of The Art of War by Sun Tzu every week to my supervisor, as this would toughen me up to be a lawyer. The third option was finding the light bulb cupboard, accessing it after hours of the maintenance department, and connecting it to my supervisor's desk lamp would count towards brownie points on my appraisal. I mean, the statements itself were quite shocking when I read it for the first time, I think. And the most answers which we have got to be the false one is the last one, that doing it for your supervisor. I think I'm going to leave it to you to answer whether they have been able to guess it or not.
Actually, that's wrong. The false one is A, about eating the apple in the room or printing paper, as the noise would irritate the supervisor. But just like JD said, it's false for me, but it's true for a number of other people in the firm that because we share the room with someone, and it's very true for other people. And I just found these things shocking when some of the trainees come and tell me what they undergo. And, particularly because that supervisor is sitting and printing his own paper in the room, his or her own paper in the room, but will not have the trainees doing that because that noise apparently affects them. So, yeah, but the other two are absolutely true. And, yeah, lots more war stories there.
I think this is also a reflection because we have in our audience a mixed bunch today. We have lawyers of different age groups. We have students. We have people from the corporate profession. So it's interesting to see how they actually look into these situations and vote on them. I'm going to now move on to the next poll and open it up. These are the 3 statements which have been provided by Karishma. I'm going to read it out as well. Far more Indian men instruct me as a barrister than British men. The only difficult boss I had was a female one. Life is well balanced as a busy practitioner at the English commercial bar. I think people have already started voting, so I'm just going to give it 2 more seconds before closing it. So most answers in favor of the false statement is the last statement, that the life is well balanced as a busy practitioner at the English commercial bar. Karishma, which is actually a horror story, which is what I would want to know.
The audience is absolutely right. I think they're well versed with the rigor of our profession, so they've got it right. But the interesting one is A, and it's true. And I think those who are of Indian origin watching this in the audience should really pat their back, because I agree with what Pratibha has said. I've had no problem at all in being a woman in the law in India, and a lot of my clients, those clients who are Indian are men, and those clients who are British are more female than men. So, pat yourselves.
Thank you, Karishma. Moving on to the last poll, I'm just going to put it open for the audience to vote now. And these are the 3 questions which are given by Trina. Statements, The first one is, I took maternity leave of 1 year. The second one was, I was selected by the CEO, who is a male, and the president of the legal committee, a male, of a particular chamber of commerce as the secretary general of a leading regional arbitration institution. The last option was, male postgraduate students outnumber the female postgraduate students in international dispute resolution.
Well, in the poll, the first and second question somehow is merged. So I don't know how yeah.
I think I've got a lot of answers, but I think we can answer it depending. Let's see the audience, how they have reacted, and then let's come back to Trina and let her answer as to which is actually the false statement over here. So according to most people, male postgraduate students, with respect to how many postgraduate students we have in the universities, according to them, that is the false statement, that they outnumber the female postgraduate students. So I think it's for Trina to tell us whether they have guessed it right or not.
That's correct, and irrespective of the fact of merging the question, I think what I wanted to highlight is that, as I said, I think we really need to give credit to where we are, and we really need to give credit to our colleagues, male, female, leading by example. And what we need to highlight is the fact that we need to open opportunities to everybody. Actually, the statement about I took maternity leave of 1 year, that's false as well. And probably we've all experienced this. And that's another point. Just going briefly back to what was discussed and the questions why where we are with the numbers is what we call the pipeline leak. We have to be mindful to the fact that some jurisdictions women have 2-3 weeks of maternity leave, other jurisdiction of 2 months, of 6 months, other have 1 year, or in Sweden where male husbands, they have to, mandatory take paternity leave as well to share it with women. So I think the message that I wanted to send with these questions and with the answers is to be mindful to where we are and the progress that we made, and to manage to keep the discussion going and to achieve what we want to achieve.
Thank you. I mean, very beautifully summarized. We need to keep continuing this discussion and send the message across. And before I thank each one of you for taking the time today and joining us today, I would request Mr. Nishith Desai give the closing remarks of the session today and share his views and thoughts on this idea.
So thank you very much, Payal, and everyone on the panel. It has been wonderful discussion, and I thoroughly enjoyed. And I was thinking that, do we need this kind of discussion in today's age and time? Fundamentally, that's what is bothering me. This should come naturally. Why are we, getting into this discussion at this age? So we are not mature as a society, to look at. And fortunately, in my journey, I was a counsel, and then turned into a founder of a law firm, which is not usual in India. So my initial days as a counsel, even today, I go and argue because how we have a unique system. There is some disturbance. Just
I think others have to put on mute.
Alice, if you could go on mute, please.
Appreciate a lot. Thank you so much. And, I did my law in 1973, and in 1977, I did my master's in law with international business, and then I studied and specialized in globalization. And those were the days, very different days, And then over a period of time in 1983, 85, one of the top investment bankers, managing director, told me to set up a law firm. That was Bear Stearns, which investment banker doesn't exist in Lehman crisis. But when I was told to set up a law firm, I was not in a hurry to set up a shop one fine morning, and so I said, let me see how these law firms are set up. It's always a surprise, and for us, we are only few law firms in India with, a maximum would be 30, 40, 50 lawyers and stuff like that. Look at how these firms have grown around the world, and let me take some time. So I spent about 4.5 years studying global law firms and accounting firms, consulting firms, and of course McKinsey helped me to build a firm, and I was a bit inspired on that as well. So, I got an opportunity to look at I talked to about 100 managing partners of accounting firms, law firms, and other kind of. So in one way, that was very helpful because some of the concepts that we are discussing today, I got to learn very early in the game, And so it was in 1990 I set up this law firm, and obviously at that point of time, nobody would want to join me because I'm a solo practitioner, startup, and stuff like that. And then what happened that I thought that I see a lot of women sitting at home because of maternity. They are home because of some other reasons, and so I had early stage a woman, and she had to leave at 5 or 6 o'clock. Families were rigid; they have to be on time and stuff like that. But it worked out pretty good. I said, there's a whole big source available at home, very talented pool of women. So let others hire the men around, and I thought that let me focus on women who are sitting at home, and if I'm flexible in my approach to give them, that kind of a flexibility to work, because I found one or two interesting traits, and I'm not being biased here, is that often women are very dedicated, and number two, they are very accountable and they want to do their job. So they are very good at multitasking. So I think that was a trait. Again, I have no statistics on that. My experience was extremely good. So I thought nobody is using the huge resource that is sitting at home, which is talented, and why not use them? So began to use that, and again, those as maternity leave and other kind of things, the factors which most law firms and even the organizations felt, oh, we have to give this leave, and they are not there, and all that kind of thing. They were not hiring to start with. In fact, I know some organizations, they had a clear policy not to hire women. Okay. And it was a surprise to me at that point of time. But because I studied over 100 organizations around the world over 4.5 years' time, a lot of things I learned. And first thing I learned after all this was what you should look into is leadership trait. And I did a lot of research on leadership, and in simple words, I found two things. It's all about competency and about inspiration. Okay, if I see that those traits in anyone, that is somebody who is most welcome. Okay, and as you move up, your humility, level 5 leadership, what is now called, okay, those traits came in, and it really began to show wonderful results. It was good work. I think we always maintain balanced life even today. In regular office, most of our people would leave office about 6:37, but still we are probably the most productive firm. I would not like to blow my own trumpet. We have been for the last 4 years, since 2014 to 2019, 5 years in a row, we have been ranked as almost on the top on most innovative law firms in Asia. At times number 1, 2, like I'm not getting number as any significance, but the fact I found was that even when there is a diversity, you can become more innovative. You have different perspective. That is the reason you become, you think out of box, because you solve problems. When women have limited time and you have to still get quite productive, how do you do that? So, and I find that has really worked. Now, of course, you have gone nearly 100% virtual. So coming to office is now voluntary. Accessibility is more important. So that's the only thing. And you decide how do you want to. And I think the whole concept of balancing work life has moved to harmonious work style. So you decide what is most balancing, and that is really, we have found a lot of advantages. Today, I'm very proud to say, and at least that we have about 48% of our people which are women, and 43% in leadership position. I think, again, this was never designed to be that way. It just came natural, and we have 3 levels of interviews. So we always look at the merits. And again, what is merit and all this is a different subject. But as Payal mentioned and Gauri mentioned one time, and I think Pradip was talking about it, I think somehow that thought is not even going that she's a woman and he's a man, or he's a boy and a girl. We just look at what a person is all about. And if somebody is inspirational, somebody is humble, not mentally, attitude matters, decided altitude, and those kind of factors gets in, I think you're there, And if you hire right people, they will find work for themselves. You don't have to really work for that. So our experience has been extremely good, and you can see on this panel, all the 3 bright women, they are brain counts. I am the head count in the firm. That's what they told me. And, so I said, I agree on that because I can only house, but you have created a home, and we have been working for so long. You can see that Gauri has been there forever. Payal has been there. Pratibha almost now 10 after coming from the US, etc. It's been fun working, and and I think the best part is that possibly, and we have list a burnout rate, and again, that's what is my field. If somebody is burning out, please tell me. But to the best of my knowledge and belief and understanding, I think on the whole, there's nothing like a perfect world. But I think it has created a great environment, and I think this panel, which talked about dispute resolution, I think women are more suited to dispute resolution because they want to resolve the disputes, and not dispute litigation, which men are often not interested in, because they want to fight the art of war that is taught from the beginning. Somebody mentioned about it, So we are in the fighting mode, and I think that is not the way to resolve. I think we have much better ways to resolve the issues, have more peace in the world, and also social orientation and stuff like that. I think we have found a very good, resource, and I think we should forget about this gender diversity as a subject, because it should become part of the natural, and not only gender but also other diversities. We are now talking about. So we even hire people not only from top law school, but from deliberately from other schools as well. Because sometimes we are so biased. These are all inbuilt biases. Not that one is good or bad, but talent can come from anywhere. And we have found that some talents are coming from places unknown. And I'll just end my, talk with small story. There was an intern who came from some very small village, and did internship for a month. And after 1 month, he said, "Sir, can I just go out today? I have not seen an ocean," And he wrote paper quoting, all the global leaders and all the globalization people. I thought that he was from some top university and top law, school or something like that. The paper he wrote was fantastic. And I could not imagine that he has no exposure. He has not even gone and seen the ocean. He said, "I came there, I've been working. Ocean is about, I don't know, less than 100 meters away, I don't know, from our office." But we find that, he had not gone out on the ocean. And when he has not seen ocean, but he looks beyond oceans, I think that is the kind of world today we are in with, and I think we have to be now moving towards becoming, what is a more naturally diversified institution or organization. I think I really compliment you for this whole event that you have set up today. It's a huge response, and Payal, you conducted it very well. A lot of humor and other ones had gone in. Each one of you responded with all the stories. So I was glued for about an hour and a half, and I sincerely thank every one of you for bringing up this subject, and all the participants who have come and participated in big way. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Welcome again, and let's have more programs like this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, NMD. And I would like to thank from the bottom of my heart today being able to do a panel on a topic close to my heart, and having such amazing panelists with me today and sharing their views and ideas. And I think the only point I will take from this session today is, as NMD also said, the way forward is the way together for all of us in this entire movement. Thank you so much, everyone. I've already held up everybody way ahead of the time which we had allotted for the webinar today. Thank you, everyone, once again.